Hello, good morning. My name is Suman Buchar and I am a Londoner now. I work in the fields of arts and culture and women's organization. I was born and brought up in East Africa, in Tanzania. My dad moved there initially as a kind of a bachelor, and then he got married, and all me and my siblings were born in Tanzania. And we lived there. I suppose I was 13 when I came to the UK, so a lot of my early life was in Tanzania. Um, I mean, I went to school there, but because my father was a teacher, what happened was that he was allowed to go to India every 3 years. He'd got a holiday, and we would go to India every 3 years by sea, which was quite exciting and quite an adventure. And then the intention was always to settle down in India when we got to India. But and we did make attempts to do that actually, but what usually happened was that my dad had to go back to teach, so the parents, the kids missed the dad missed the kids and the family, and then we'd just go back again to Tanga, which is where we lived.
So why did you want to leave Tanga?
I think there was no conscious decision about leaving Tanzania, but what happened at the time was when Idi Amin was chucking out the Asians out of Uganda in 1972, people, I guess, in the rest of East Africa got a little apprehensive about their own situation as to what would happen, although perhaps there was no indication of that in Tanzania because um, you never got any sense of that, although maybe things were changing a little bit in Zanzibar slightly, but I cannot comment on that because I remember these things as a child. And anyway, the idea was people did start leaving or thinking of a future beyond East Africa. And my father thought it would be sensible for us, his children and his wife, to go to the UK because he was a British citizen, really. I mean, he had arrived in Tanzania when it was Tanganyika and it hadn't even become independent. So he had come to a British protectorate. I don't know if that's the right word, but that's when he went to East Africa.
And there was also the issue, there was a kind of socialist communist government at the time. Was there an impact on your being there or your family's being there?
Well, obviously, when the kids were born, Tanzania, it was Tanganyika, it became Tanzania. It was run by President Julius Nyerere, the teacher, and it was a socialist, a kind of a Ujamaa government. And I mean, in terms of our daily life, we might not have really felt it, um, or you might have. I mean, small things like, it wasn't as easy to get chocolate as it might have been in Nairobi, for example, but we didn't really eat chocolate all the time, but it was like a treat. But in terms of in school, as young children, initially we went to a Catholic school, then the names changed from like an English name to a Swahili name. The nuns changed from English nuns who left to go to Norfolk, weirdly, which is where we ended up when we came to Britain. But anyway, uh, but what also happened was that we had a little shamba, a little piece of land in school, and we all had to work at it, just things that were collectively based. And once in a year, on Saba Saba, 7th of July, we'd go to the public rally, things like that, in that way. A kind of a collective activism of a certain sort.
Did you have any sense of your parents, their sense of belonging to Africa, or would they have said, no, we are Indians first? And how did that experience, or did they ever talk about it?
Well, I think in the case of our family, my father was the first person who went to East Africa. And he went, I suppose now you would describe it as an economic migrant, although, as far as I'm aware, he was a young single guy who went to work in Tanzania. How he got there, I cannot tell you because unfortunately both my parents have gone. I mean, how in the sense of like what took him, did a friend recommend it or whatever, I don't know. Um, so we don't have the history like other Asian people do of having a kind of life in East Africa, earlier from the 19th century and so on. So I can't comment on that in that sense. All I know was that as our grandparents from my parents' side, I mean, we used to visit them when we went to India. We're from the Punjab area generally, and there was no. I mean, I can't really speak to that what they felt about it, except to say that it was for my father. It was a good opportunity to get a job, and then obviously he had an arranged marriage to my mum, and she had to follow him across to East Africa, which is where his job was. And I think it was difficult for her initially, being lonely, like not having any friends there, not knowing people there. Although there was a small Asian community in Tanga where they lived, doctors' families or something like that. A few people that used to get together. They had a gurdwara, they had a Arya Mandir, so there were lots of things like that, places where you could meet your country men and women.
I'm interested in the different communities who lived in Tanga, and did you have any recollection how the community dealt with each other, like the majority black population, and then you mentioned already you had a Gurudwara and a
Well,
Mandir.
as far as the kind of collectiveness of the South Asian community was concerned, I feel like there was a lot of integration in the sense of the Gujarati, the Punjabi, the Muslim, the Bohras, the Goans, a lot of Goan community as well. But I would say there was less interaction with African people. My dad was a teacher and he had students, and sometimes his students used to give us extra tuitions, in maths or whatever, but mostly as a young child I kind of rebelled against extra teaching, if you know what I mean. But I don't think there was much interaction. But having said that, I only know this a little bit and I have to investigate it more, is that my dad was part of those group of young people who believed in the independence of Africa. So because he'd been to Tanzania before it was independent, before Kenya also got its independence, so they were involved in a kind of I wouldn't call it a radical struggle, but people who were advocating for the independence of those countries in which they were now sort of citizens to a certain degree. So yeah, but generally speaking, in Tanzania or in Tanga, we didn't have what you might call a formal apartheid situation of any kind. But yes, I mean, we used to go to a swimming club, for example, but that was a swimming club where mostly they were just Asians, and across the road from the sea, you could see the European Yacht Club, so whatever few Europeans were left in Tanzania in the 60s, they had their own club. So there was a kind of a separatism. As kids, we used to go to it used to be called the Raska Zone Club. I think Raska Zone is an area in Tanga. And we used to see, from where we were sitting, the sort of English people going water skiing, and it used to look quite exciting and interesting. We couldn't even swim, so we just enjoyed being in the water. So yeah, I mean, it was interesting to just see that, but we had our own networks of socializing and so on. I don't think I met a European person in East Africa in that sense, that I didn't know anybody. Actually, apart from the nuns who were originally ran the school that we went to, basically. That's when I say we, I mean me and my sister. And then maybe my brothers later, because I think it was a mixed school.
But the relationship between the Asians and the native Africans, I mean, how did you...
The thing is, I don't feel like I'm as hung up about it as nowadays people have a tendency to beat themselves about it. I feel that we did have a good relationship, In terms of in our house, there was somebody who worked there, the ayah, let's say, or whatever, that is my relationship with her. My parents were quite equitable in terms of treating people. In my school, I had African friends, we brought them home, and up to a certain degree, one kept in touch, but then obviously I left it well over 50 years ago. My father had his students, he took them to India. There was a bit of a discrimination in India. Not a discrimination, I think it's like a curiosity. You see one black person in a sea of 100 of Asians. So, yeah, I mean, the thing is, I feel like nowadays there's become fashionable for Asians to sort of speak about the relationship with Africa and just generally say we were cruel, they were cruel. I feel like that's too simplistic an argument, and I don't feel I can buy it in that sense, really, because I know that my father and a few other families were instrumental in creating the independence, helping to facilitate the independence of two nations of East Africa. I can't talk about Uganda, but I know also there were some Asian people in Uganda in the kind of government. So yeah, the idea of the system of layers of, was a kind of a colonial system that was put in place, and everybody sort of followed it. So yeah, anyway, that is my kind of reflected position. You only intersected in certain shared spaces, if you know what I mean. That is what it's all about. I mean, obviously I haven't been to East Africa and I want to go, and it's like 50 years. I did want to go last year, which was 50 years, but I feel like I don't want to just go and be a tourist. I don't want to just go for safari. It's pointless. In my mind's eye, I can see the places that we lived in, and it's important for me to be able to go in a kind of a proper way for me to understand it for myself. Because when we first came to the UK, I saw myself more as a citizen of Africa than I saw myself as a citizen of India. And that is not because I didn't know anything about India. I think I know enough and I know my own background and everything. But it was more like we had grown up there and we were also different to our cousins in India, let's say. But, over the years, those views change and fluctuate. And now I do feel a huge part of my heritage or my upbringing has come from my parents' relationship with East Africa. But at the same time, I know that I'm of Indian background and origin, and I am Indian in a certain way. But now my definition is British Asian. It's very clear to me what it is. I know these are self-definitions, but that's what it is.
Can you describe when you left? What happened around there? How your father came around and told you we're leaving?
So I think we left in the early 70s. We went to India for a holiday in maybe just before 71, and then we were studying in India, and the Bangladesh war kind of was going on in the skies near where we lived, but that's fine. But what happened was that we went to visit our father for a summer holiday. I think this would have been about 1972, actually. And this is the time what's happening with Idi Amin, Uganda, is going on. And when we went to East Africa, it was supposed to be just for our school summer holidays because we were all in admission in India, me and my siblings, that is one sister and two brothers. And the whole intention was, yeah, we're going for a summer holiday, we're going to come back. But over there, my parents must have chatted to each other and decided that they're going to send us to England because it was a better opportunity for the children and their future. And my father had to complete his service because he worked in the government. And really, we never went back to India. So we had a home in India with all our things in there. We just stayed in East Africa. Then my mother, who was of Indian passport holding citizen, and the names of her children were on her passport. So, they had to change it because make her like her husband's dependent British. I don't know these things. So we spent some time, like about 8 or 9 months in Tanga and occasionally going to Dar es Salaam to get that sorted out. And we literally just came to the UK. We didn't go back. So it's like if you're leaving your house here today because you're going on a summer holiday to Portugal and then 10 years later you come back. It's a bit like that, It was a bit upsetting for the kids because it was like, oh, my things are in my bedroom, so and so, but you get used to it.
So what happened to your place there?
Well, we lived in a place called Chandigarh, and we had our cousins who lived next door, and I think eventually my uncle sort of, you know, the house was rented, got rid of whatever we had, fridge, this, that, and the other. You know, the things and the clothes. Who knows? I can't comment. And some things they did keep, because eventually, when we did go to India, like after being settled in the UK for many years, you know, my mother did bring the odd thing back that was of sentimental value to her more than of any material value. So yeah, it did happen.
What happened to this place?
Well,
did you sell it, or
no, we didn't. We didn't really own a place. It was. I don't think it was a culture of owning places. Like we didn't. It was like a rented. You know, yeah. So, and we didn't actually have one place. I think we've stayed in like different bits of Tanga, as it were, because it was mostly rented house. I think, you know. And then my father did join us eventually, like after he finished his service, 20 years service. But he came to England, and he kind of, you know, when we came here initially, we went to live in Norfolk. I mean, we landed in Heathrow on a cold January. My brother remembers the date, and he always reminds me. I can check on my phone and tell you, you know. So we met our cousins, our English Asian cousins, because they were very English to us. We'd become very Indian by then, in inverted commas. I can't explain what I mean by that, but hey. So we stayed for about a night in London, and then we went to live in Norfolk in King's Lynn, and we stayed for about a year there, and then my father came, and we stayed in London, but he passed away soon after, so, you know, so our lives began in the UK in kind of earnest, you could say.
So that must have been quite difficult with your mom, with 4 siblings.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
You know, and as you say, you were more Indian in Britain. Do you have any recollections, or do you want to talk
Of
about
what?
it?
Of what?
About your settling period in Britain, in Norfolk.
Well, we actually went to live with our uncle, my mother's brother, so our Mamaji, as we call them, and his wife. I mean, they were very good to us, because he put up his sister and her kids, while her husband, i.e. my father, was finishing off his service in Africa, which would have taken about another year or so. My father used to teach in a government school, and I think that if you spent 20 years or so, you were entitled to a kind of a pension or whatever, so he did want to complete that, you know. Yeah, I mean, we went to school in Norfolk. They were very good to us, i.e. my uncle and aunt. But in Norfolk at the time, there weren't that many. There wasn't a big Asian community. There were a few families, you know, and yeah. So me and my sister initially were the only Asian girls in the school, and then I think my brothers, they were the only Asian kids, but they were younger, much younger than us. So, but we stayed for a year there. They put us in like a year lower to our age, because they felt that our English wasn't great. Our English was pretty good, but I think our accent might have been very different, you know. I don't remember, because you had to take a little test in the education authority at that time.
Did you feel any? Did you have an experience of any racism or from the Britons living in Norfolk?
Well, I wouldn't really call it that. I mean, like my uncle and his wife were already settled in that town, so they were well known to, let's say, the local community there. In school, I mean, I would consider it slight ignorance, because the kids did not know very much about East Africa, where we came from. And I mean, I was surprised at the lack of curiosity about other cultures, but that was the 70s. I mean, I think it's very different now. So, you know, we did get asked some silly questions like, did you live in a mud hut, or did you ride on an elephant? And we thought, no, we have real houses like how you have them. But I wouldn't say nothing malevolent. Although, having said that, at that time on the television in the UK, you used to have programs like Love Thy Neighbour, whatever, and people did use language that you would not use today. And kids, whatever they hear on television is what they kind of say again. So, I mean, I don't want to repeat the words, but, you know. But overall, I quite enjoyed being in Norfolk. And we did miss I suppose, not having a huge Asian community, because we had been grown up in that way. It was a different kind of a school getting used to. First, it was so cold. We hated the cold. We never got used to it, you know. and all that, and then the culture of going to school, coming home, watching telly or whatever, you know.
Did you miss India and Africa?
I think we missed our dad, really, you know, pretty much. But I think, although, I mean, I haven't really thought about it and I was not able to articulate it then, is that we did have a sense of it's not something that we could go back to. You know, it's not like a summer holiday that you could just rush off.
How did your background and upbringing shape yourself and your challenges and struggles which you would have had over the years? How do you identify yourself?
Well, I'm British Asian, as I've said, and obviously I know where I come from, I know what I look like and everything like that. I feel like, you know, I sort of grew up in a, you know, we're a middle class family, we have education but no money kind of thing, you know, but our parents were, in inverted commas you could say, liberal, you know, like we were not hit as kids or anything like that. We were encouraged to be adventurous, to have a spirit of curiosity, to find out things, encouraged to be friends with everybody. And we had our own innate sense of self, you know. And because we have grown up in three cultures, like in East Africa, in India, and in the UK, so we were exposed without anybody having to teach you to a lot of different kind of cultural heritages, to a lot of people of different races and languages. So yeah, I mean, I think that sort of gives you an innate confidence in yourself in being able to, you know, speak to everybody else. The rest of it depends on your character, about whether you feel you're shy or a quiet person, or, you know, like you don't, whatever, much more gregarious, you know, that kind of thing. When you lived in East Africa or Tanzania in our case, you know, you sort of know a bit of the history from just seeing the people. Like the Marabus or the Arabs used to be there, for example, you know, the Africans were there, the Indians were there, but you don't analyze it or figure out, you know, why is there, or you look at the buildings, you know, and they come from a different period of like different centuries. So in that sense, you know, the past is part of the present, so you don't really think about it. I don't remember in school in Tanzania if I had learned about that. And because it was quite a young country when we were growing up there, I mean, it was 1961 is the independence, you know, of Tanzania. So when you're going to school 7 and 8, I mean, that is like my age. I'm as old as Tanzania in that sense. So a 7 or 8 year old country is thinking about the future and rather than the past. So I feel like in that sense, you know, it wasn't something that we looked at in an inquiring way. It was just there, but it's just that when we came to the UK and we got involved, like with a theatre company called Tara Arts at the time, whom we met fortuitously after we saw them doing some Diwali sketches at Wandsworth Town Hall after we had settled in London, is then we asked Jatinder Verma, who was one of the founders of Tara, and he ran it, and we knew that he had studied history, that if you could give a few of us that used to go to the group, you know, some lessons in our history kind of thing. So that's when we started being, let's say, more questioning or curious or wanting to know more about our colonial past, our shared histories or things like that, really.
A little bit up to today, you know, do you feel starting in your school, do you think there was a kind of, here in this country, do you think there was a kind of teaching in colonial background and the history of the colonies? You know, you came from a colony first, it was a colony, you know.
Well, I mean, I went to the school in, say, the 70s in the UK. I did enjoy my school, generally speaking. It was a mixture of, like, I did do history, so it depends what was on the curriculum. I did a lot of the Tudors and Stuarts and that kind of history, which was interesting to me, you know. In terms of doing history about, well, I did the Italian, you know, the Italian unification, things like that, French, whatever. It's more that when I went to university, you could pick the modules, like I wanted to study history, which I did. So I was able to pick I picked like South African history, which related to the Indian indentured labor in South Africa, Indian history, partition, by which time we had also been starting to go to Tara Arts Theatre Company. And, you got to know in a much more analytical way about the partition of India, even though your parents kind of lived through the partition and experienced it, but you didn't really ask them any questions because nobody really had wanted to talk about those things in that time. So I feel like I chose what I wanted to study. So from that point of view, I was interested in my history, let's say. So I was able to access it. But we had a good teacher in Jatinder, like in the sense that also to read books, Romila Thapar in those days would have been a big writer, or I can't even remember the name, Basham, The Wonder That Was India. Like we were told about all these writers by somebody who was giving us a bit of knowledge about it, and the rest of it depended on our curiosity. Like we either went to the Commonwealth Institute Library, which had, let's say, special subjects, or you tried to ask your local library if they had any books. Obviously, it's better now in that the children have opportunity in schools to be exposed to a wider range of history and global cultures than we were in that sense. But I don't feel that I should have been able to swap one for the other, because I feel, again, that's a really very big nuanced conversation. If I didn't learn about the Steward and Stewarts and learned instead about the Black Hole of Calcutta, for example, would that be better for me? I don't know, I can't really say. It's too simplistic to say either or. It's good to know about both. But also what is good to know about is the analysis that we're having now, and some of it isn't like decolonizing the museums as well. It's like the interpretation. Children today are being exposed to the so-called naive interpretation of how wonderful it was, as well as how horrible it was. So I think that's a better way of being.
There's a lot of discussion about migration stories, always, present day migration. Do you see any parallels to the experiences of your parents and your ancestors to what the present migrants in Britain have?
Yeah, I mean, I think, some people are economic migrants, some people are migrants out of necessity, like what happened to the Ugandan Asians, Syrian people leaving and stuff like that, Afghani people having to leave, or the Hong Kong Chinese. Yeah, you can see parallels to in that way. I don't know, is there, like, what would you like me to focus on,
That's
No, your
or
just
or even, yeah,
your take.
or yeah, I mean, there are parallels, and there are similarities in that sense, because, or even in terms of the historical experiences, we talk about the partition of India, stuff like that, but you can think now the partition of Israel, Palestine, that's like such a current big story. Or you can think about the partition of other nations in the MENA region, which are all as a result of colonial histories, and we're all trying to understand it and, figure out how we can live together in a way. I can't claim to understand all of it, but yeah, I think we had curiosity. I don't talk about me, like it was me, my sister, to Shaheen, another actress who was there, a few other people who used to go when it was what you might call still a community theatre, and because we wanted to know, and he knew a lot, so we did ask him to give us some insight into it, and then the rest of it was like, as we went to university, college, this, that, and the other, we just expanded our thinking, or our mind, or in that way.
And you thought in a way at the time that theatre was kind of important for you as a kind of empowerment?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all joined theatre at that point because we wanted to say something, and it was like a vehicle that we just saw, and something clicked in your head. Like I saw some sketches in Diwali time at a function in Wandsworth Town Hall, and the sketches were about younger generation, talking about intergenerational action, talking about the relationship to Britain. They were like small sketches, and you just looked at it and thought, like, that is saying what I want to say or what I'm thinking. how do I find out more about this group? And there were some people there, Praveen Bahal, like one of the founders. You just spoke to them. You discovered that they used to meet in Millen Centre in Trinity Road, and we just started going.
And you started explaining you studied history, and how did it go on? You finished your studies, and what did you do
So when I went to
afterwards?
university, I did study history and classics. I was interested in like Greek and Roman history, but in terms of the context of Indian history and South African history and so on, I mean, I got a degree, but like my working environment and my degree is kind of different. I initially ended up working at the GLC, the Greater London Council, but the 80s in the UK or in London also were quite interesting in terms of activism of black and Asian, like arts and cultural or social activism. And in those days, the word black was a kind of a political term, which was not not a colorist term. It was associated with, I suppose, the politics of colonialism, in that sense. So so in that way, we got involved in different things. So the history came out in that sense. We are here because you were there became the slogan of the times.
And what did you do in the GLC at the
Oh,
time?
I was just
What was your role there?
I was a grants officer or something. I ended up working in, I got a job in a unit called the Ethnic Minorities Unit, and I joined the GLC at a time when the Ethnic Minorities Unit was celebrating Anti-Racist Year. 1984 was Anti-Racist Year. So I think my role was to give grants to different community groups. I was in a team. I was just like, not a unilateral, but I was in a team of people. It was my first proper job after university. Yeah, it was quite interesting, It exposed me again to a huge sort of cultural, like what was going on in London with different kinds of groups, what people were doing, from cultural groups in languages to people running supplementary schools for black and Asian kids to have extra tuition in order to be able to pass O levels, things like that. Lots of a variety of stuff. Yeah.
And then the GLC was
And
dismantled.
and also just to say, and also in the arts and cultural thing, to give grants to support the sort of individual ideas of cultural groups that came from the black, the Asian, the different kind of communities, whether it was film culture, whether it was painting, visual culture, whether it was theatre and so on. So I did work in there until it was abolished by Margaret Thatcher, I think, at the time. And then there was another unit that was created by about 8 of the London boroughs to try and run some of the ideas that the GLC had put across, but that only lasted a short while, and then I got involved in television, like making documentaries, things like that. You pursued the interest in the arts and cultural area mostly.
Can you elaborate a bit on this, what you have been doing till today at a professional level?
Well, I think that mostly trying to pursue arts and culture. So for a while, I worked with 2 companies. Like one was a workshop called Retake Film and Video Collective, which is like the only South Asian franchised workshop, because even in the 80s, people couldn't just make films in some way. You had to have a union card and so on. But I wasn't part of the core group of workshop people, but what I did was I set up and facilitated courses around the history of Indian cinema, the history of world cinema, because it was of interest. Again, there was a growing interest from young people at the time, and then eventually moved into making documentaries for television, Channel 4/BBC, as part of an associated company there called First Take Limited, and alongside it also being involved in theatre, because my sister then set up a theatre company. So we have followed the arts and cultural field in a very active way, because the drive came from wanting to tell your own stories, wanting to have representation and wanting to be put across the narratives of stories that are really not well known. And now you could say 25 years later, people are more openly talking about the partition of India. We haven't actually talked very much about the East African experience of the South Asians in East Africa. We really haven't talked about it much because it just gets put into this simplistic characteristic of the Asians were horrible to the Africans. But in terms of arts and culture, I've only seen like one or two plays in that context happen. And, you know, we don't really know. I wouldn't say I know much about that experience in a deep way. And I am interested in knowing about it. You know, what took a person to go in a dhow, DHOW, sail on the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea to end up in East Africa from Dewey or Daman in India? Why? You know, why subject yourself to that? And then to work on the railways or and then I don't know. I mean, like there's just so much there that we don't really know about. And then to be treated terribly when the nations became independence. Also, I mean, think about what happened in Kenya in 1968 as well. So, you know, I think it's a complicated history and we haven't really talked about it in a deep way, and we should. But even I'm ignorant of it and I want to know more about it, which is why I want to go back to see my home in Tanzania, but I don't want to just rock up in that way and go on safari. I've never been on safari. That is sad, isn't it? We lived in East Africa, but we didn't do the touristy things. We just lived there.
What do you think should change in society? I mean, you talked about that we should tell our stories, and do you have any fears or challenges which you would come across your way if you were going to dig further stories?
I think the story of the relationship of the Indians or the South Asians in Africa is much more complex than we think, and their relationship with Africans, right? We know a little bit about South Africa because obviously Gandhi was there. There was a lot of discrimination. There was apartheid in a formal sense of the word, you know, and everything. And then there is the simplistic kind of rendering, you know, the Asians didn't mix, they didn't marry Africans, etc. But there are the odd stories where people did do that. So, but also in terms of the political struggles, I think that some Asians were involved in the politics of the independence of East African countries, let's say. Yes, there were some people involved in business and that kind of stuff as well. So I don't think there's a fear, but I feel like we do need to uncover it. I mean, I was reading in the Sunday Times of last week, there is now a Kenyan mayor in somewhere in Northern Ireland, and she said the food that they eat is chapatis, nyama, which is meat, and kachumber, which is like a tomato and onion mix. Now, chapati and kachumber sounds like Indian words to me. So somehow the cuisine has ended up being part of African cuisine now. So I'm curious about that. You know, how did that happen? You know? I don't remember that happening when I was there, if you know what I mean. But so yeah, I don't think there's anything to fear. I feel like it would be quite exciting to know, you know, in that sense. And if you were a single explorer who left India and went to settle somewhere, it would have been quite difficult for you as well to just be the one or two people who initially went there. It's like the Indians going to Trinidad in the early days, you know, or to the Caribbean generally.
When you go to India, you said I mean, obviously you were young. How do people perceive you? Do they see you as a foreigner?
Well, obviously, because in the sense of they have an antenna that can spot you from the UK, you know, they just have it. Even though I can, you know, speak Hindi or Punjabi as needed, so you can try and blend in, but somehow they figure it out. Then they say, "Aap kahan se hain?" Then you say, "No, actually, I'm from Delhi." If I'm in Bombay, I'll say I'm from Delhi. If I'm in Delhi, I'll say I'm from Bombay. You know, but yeah, whatever, you know, they can. So what can you say? What can you do about that? Or your skin is slightly lighter because you haven't been exposed to the sun in the same way, whatever. Your clothes might be slightly different, you know. I don't know.
But deep down you feel like you're an Indian.
Deep down I feel I'm me. You know, I'm a British Asian person. Suman Buchar, that's me, basically.
And where do you call your home now?
My home is where I live. It's kind of here. I've spent a lot of my life in the UK. There is no myth of return. You know, where am I going to go back to? I don't even think I could afford to buy something in India or to live somewhere in India, renting wise or whatever, you know. Obviously, I'd like to spend more time there, you know. It's a very vibrant country. I'd like to spend time in East Africa, but the question is, what would I do there? Apart from get a tan on the beach or whatever, you know, which is not my personality, even though I'd quite like to go there. Anyway, India and East Africa. I have family in India more than... We don't have any family in East Africa because, as I said, my father was the only person who went there, really. Yeah.
If you think about the present situation, do you have any wishes? It could be personal, but it could also be
About what?
about the society. What should change? What should be?
Where, here in the UK?
It's just some personal wishes.
No, not really. I just want to win the lottery and do more plays. That's what I want to do. Or make a movie, you know, things like that. But, you know, those are like day-to-day struggles that one just continues with in that sense. I don't have...
You were talking about your sister and her son, her boys. They
Yeah.
are young teenagers growing up in this country.
Well, they're young adults now.
Young
Yeah,
adults.
yeah,
So
yeah.
how do they see themselves?
They see themselves as British. That's why I want to do my sister's show in Croydon, because for them, their sense of identity is rooted in their home, which is the UK, really, pretty much, you know? Yeah. But I think she should speak for like her, and the best speaking is the play, because it's a question that we all talk. Oh, we always, like, Asians are more obsessed about figuring out who we are than any other culture that I've come across. And you think, why? You know who you are. You know. I mean, I'm joking, but you know what I mean. You know, but it's a preoccupation across generations, especially in the arts and cultural field. It definitely is. You know. Yeah, I mean, I think identity is a kind of a self sort of definition to a certain degree in terms of yourself. But yes, of course, when you fill in those silly little forms, you know, you have to pick from the drop-down menu, and I try and pick other always, and then I have to explain what I mean by other. But except when you're going in a hospital or the doctor, because you think, yeah, okay, they say Asian genes are shit in this kind of way, or white genes are shit in this way. You know, they have all this kind of scientific rationales for it all. But to come back, like, generally speaking, identity is a self-construct thing. So for me, I do see myself as a British Asian, and I mean that because I've spent a lot of my time here, influenced by the politics here. And, you know, I did consider myself to have an African identity until a certain point of my life. But after that, I feel like I was not able to, like, hang on to that idea, because I have not really had a connection in that way, you know, except that in my passport it does say where I was born. And that is weird, because when I've gone to America a couple of times, people ask me, where is that place?